The water rushed over her ankles first, then her knees, and before Lydia Parker could catch her breath, the current had pulled her sideways and drenched her completely to the waist. The Rio Grande swelled higher than anyone had predicted this late in April of 1878, and now her travel dress clung to her legs like a second skin, heavy and cold as death itself. She gasped as another wave crashed against the wagon wheel beside her, soaking her all the way through to her chemise. "Keep moving forward," the cowboy ahead of her called back, his voice cutting through the roar of water. "Do not stop, or you will lose your footing." Lydia could barely see him through the spray, just the broad shoulders and dark hat as he led his horse through the deepest part of the crossing. Her own mare whinnied nervously, and Lydia tightened her grip on the reins, her fingers already numb. The stagecoach that was supposed to take her from El Paso to Santa Fe had broken an axle 2 days back, stranding 6 passengers in the middle of nowhere. 4 had decided to wait for another coach. Lydia and an elderly merchant had chosen to push forward with this stranger, a cattle driver who had been passing through and offered to guide them north for a reasonable fee. The merchant had turned back this morning when he saw the river. Lydia had not. She needed to reach Santa Fe before the end of the month, needed to meet her uncle who had promised her work as a school teacher. Boston felt like another lifetime ago, and the money sewn into the lining of her carpet bag represented everything she had left in this world. Turning back was not an option, even if it meant crossing a swollen river with a man whose name she barely knew. "Almost there," he shouted again, and Lydia pushed forward, her boots slipping on the rocky riverbed. Water surged up to her chest now, so cold it stole the air from her lungs. Her dress billowed around her like a sail, the layers of fabric becoming an anchor trying to drag her downstream. She struggled against it, pulling harder on the reins, urging her mare forward even as her own legs threatened to give out. And then, miraculously, the ground began to rise beneath her feet. The water dropped to her waist, then her knees again. And finally she was stumbling up the muddy bank, water streaming from every inch of her clothing. She collapsed forward, hands on her thighs, coughing and gasping. "You did well," the cowboy said, already dismounting. His own clothes were soaked through as well, his shirt plastered to his chest, his hat dripping. "That was rougher than I expected." Lydia could not speak yet. She stood there shivering, her teeth chattering so hard she thought they might crack. The April sun was warm overhead, but the wind cut through her wet clothes like knives of ice. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop the shaking. "We need to get you dry," he said, his voice more urgent now. "The temperature will drop once the sun starts going down. Can you walk a bit further? There is better shelter up ahead." She nodded, not trusting her voice. He took the reins of both horses and started walking, glancing back every few steps to make sure she followed. Lydia forced her legs to move, each step squishing water from her boots. Her dress had to weigh 20 pounds more than usual, the fabric dragging at her hips and shoulders. True to his word, they reached a small clearing within 10 minutes, a spot where cottonwood trees grew thick enough to provide a windbreak and dead branches littered the ground. The cowboy moved with efficient purpose, tying the horses to a low branch and immediately beginning to gather wood. "I am going to build a fire," he said, not looking at her as he worked. "You need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death." Lydia's face burned despite the cold. "I cannot possibly—" "I will turn away," he interrupted, still gathering branches. "My back will be to you the entire time. But Miss Parker, I have been in these territories long enough to know that hypothermia kills faster than almost anything else. Your modesty is important, but your life is more important." She stood there, water dripping onto the ground around her, and knew he was right. Already her fingers had gone from numb to painful, and her legs felt like wooden posts beneath her. She watched as he arranged the wood in a careful stack, his movements practiced and sure. He struck flint against steel, caught the spark in a nest of dry grass he had found tucked under a fallen log, and within minutes had coaxed it into flames. "There," he said, standing and brushing off his hands. "That should grow quickly. I am going to walk down to the river's edge and check on something. I will be gone at least 15 minutes. You use this time however you need." He started to walk away, then paused. Without turning around, he pulled off his own wet coat and laid it on a rock near the fire. "That will dry first. You can wrap yourself in it while your dress dries." Then he was gone, disappearing into the brush, and Lydia was left alone with the crackling fire and her own racing heart. She looked down at her soaked dress, at the way it clung indecently to her body, outlining every curve. She looked at the fire, already throwing welcome heat into the cool air. She looked at the direction he had gone, seeing nothing but trees and shadows. With shaking fingers, she began to unbutton her dress. The fabric fought her, the buttons swollen with water, but she persevered. She peeled the heavy garment away from her body, her undergarments nearly as wet beneath. She hesitated, but the wind cut through the thin cotton of her chemise, and she made her decision. Everything came off except her drawers and the shortest layer of her shift. She spread her dress carefully over a large flat rock near the fire, then her petticoat, her corset, her stockings. The heat from the flames felt like heaven against her bare arms and shoulders. She picked up his coat, still damp but warmer than nothing, and wrapped it around herself. It smelled like leather and wood smoke and something else, something masculine and not unpleasant. The coat hung nearly to her knees, far larger than her frame, and she pulled it tight as she crouched by the fire. Her whole body shook with violent shivers now that she had stopped moving. Now that the adrenaline of the river crossing had faded, she held her hands toward the flames, trying to force warmth back into her fingers. Her hair hung in wet ropes down her back, soaking into the collar of his coat, and she twisted it over one shoulder, squeezing out as much water as she could. She heard his footsteps before she saw him, the deliberate heavy tread that gave her warning. "Are you decent?" he called out. "I am covered," she answered, her voice steadier now. He came back into the clearing, but kept his word, his back turned away from her as he approached the fire from the side. In his hands he carried several fish, already cleaned. "The river gives as well as takes," he said, setting them on a flat stone. "We will eat well tonight at least." "Thank you," Lydia said, meaning it for more than just the fish. "For all of this. I realize I never properly learned your name. The stage manager just said you were heading north and could guide us." "Marcus Cole," he replied, still not looking at her. He crouched by the fire, his back straight, and began to prepare the fish for cooking. "I have been driving cattle between Texas and Colorado for the past 6 years. This route I could walk blindfolded. I am Lydia Parker, but I suppose you knew that already." The stage manager mentioned it. He threaded one of the fish onto a green stick and propped it over the fire. "He also mentioned you were a school teacher heading to Santa Fe." "Planning to be one," Lydia corrected. "My uncle has connections there. He arranged a position for me at a small school." She did not mention that her uncle was her only living relative, that her parents had died of cholera 2 years ago, that Boston had become a city of ghosts and memories too painful to bear. "That is admirable work," Marcus said, and she could hear the sincerity in his voice. "These territories need more education, more civilization." They fell into silence, but it was not uncomfortable. The fire popped and crackled, the fish began to sizzle, and slowly Lydia felt warmth returning to her body. Her dress steamed where it lay across the rock, and she pulled it closer to the flames, careful not to let it scorch. "Your dress is going to take hours to dry completely," Marcus observed, still maintaining his careful distance. "Those layers of fabric hold water like a sponge. We should plan to camp here for the night." Lydia's stomach tightened with anxiety. Spending the night alone with a strange man, even one who had shown her nothing but respect, went against every rule of propriety she had been raised with. But what choice did she have? Her dress was indeed still soaked, the fire was warm, and the alternative was trying to ride through the evening in wet clothes. "That seems sensible," she said quietly. "I will sleep on the other side of the fire," he added, as if reading her thoughts. "I have an extra bedroll you can use. You have my word as a gentleman that you are safe with me." "I believe you," Lydia said, and surprised herself by meaning it. There was something about Marcus Cole, about the careful way he kept his back turned, about the quiet competence with which he had handled every challenge today, that made her trust him. He rotated the fish, and the smell made her stomach growl audibly. She could not remember the last time she had eaten anything substantial. The stagecoach had carried limited provisions, and those had been running low even before the axle broke. "Tell me about Boston," Marcus said after a while. "I have never been east of Missouri." So Lydia talked, keeping her voice light, describing the narrow cobblestone streets, the harbor with its tall ships, the brick buildings crowded together like books on a shelf, She told him about the common where people walked on Sunday afternoons, about the street vendors selling roasted chestnuts in winter, about the theater where she had once seen a production of Hamlet. She did not tell him about the tenement where she had spent her last year in Boston after her parents died, about the factory work that had barely paid for bread, about the landlord who had looked at her with eyes that made her skin crawl. Those memories stayed locked away. "It sounds like a different world," Marcus said, pulling the first fish from the fire and setting it aside to cool. "Out here, the nearest neighbor might be 20 miles away. The towns are rough, barely more than a collection of buildings. But there is space to breathe, room to see the horizon in every direction." "Do you like it?" Lydia asked. "The isolation?" "I do," he admitted. "I grew up in Virginia, on a tobacco farm that my father lost after the war. Too many people, too many bad memories. I came west in '72 and never looked back." The war. He would have been just a boy then, Lydia calculated quickly. He looked to be perhaps 25 or 26 now, which meant he had been maybe 11 or 12 when the war ended. Young enough to remember, old enough to have been affected. "My father fought for the Union," Lydia offered. "He came back different, quieter. He never spoke about it." Marcus nodded, still facing away. "That seems common enough." He handed her the fish on its stick, carefully reaching backward so she could take it without him turning around. The gesture was almost comical in its propriety, and Lydia felt a smile tug at her lips despite everything. She accepted the food gratefully and bit into it, not caring that it burned her tongue. It was delicious, flavored by wood smoke and hunger. They ate in companionable silence as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The fire had dried Lydia's dress enough that she could turn it over, exposing the inner layers to the heat. Her petticoat was nearly dry, and she pulled it closer, already planning how she would manage to dress herself again while maintaining some shred of dignity. "The stars will be incredible tonight," Marcus said, tilting his head back toward the darkening sky. "No clouds, no city lights to dim them, just the whole universe spread out like diamonds on velvet." "You have a poetic way of speaking for a cattle driver," Lydia observed. She saw his shoulders move in what might have been a shrug. "My mother was a school teacher, actually, before she married my father. She insisted all her children learn to read and write properly, learn some poetry and literature. I might spend my days chasing cows, but I can still appreciate beauty when I see it." "I think I would have liked your mother." "She would have liked you too," Marcus said softly. "She always said that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. You showed real courage today, crossing that river." "I did not feel courageous. I felt terrified." "Exactly." He poked at the fire, sending up a shower of sparks. "Courage without fear is just recklessness. You were afraid, but you kept going. That is the definition of bravery." Warmth spread through Lydia's chest that had nothing to do with the fire. No one had called her brave before. Foolish, perhaps. Desperate, certainly. But brave? That was new. She looked at his back, really looked at him for the first time. He had broad shoulders that tapered to a lean waist, the build of someone who made his living through physical labor. His hair, dark and damp, curled slightly at the collar of his wet shirt. His hands, visible as he tended the fire, were strong and scarred. Capable hands that had built this fire, caught these fish, guided them both safely across a dangerous river. "Your shirt must be uncomfortable," Lydia said. "You should dry it too." "I will manage." "Marcus?" She surprised herself by using his first name. "You kept your word and gave me privacy and warmth. The least I can do is offer the same. I will turn away. You dry your shirt." She heard him hesitate, then chuckle low. "That seems fair." Lydia turned herself carefully, keeping his coat wrapped tight around her body, and stared out into the darkening landscape. She heard the rustle of fabric, the sound of wet cloth being wrung out, then silence. "You can turn back now," he said after a minute. "I kept my undershirt on." She turned and saw that he had spread his shirt and vest near her dress, creating a patchwork of drying clothing around the fire. He still kept his back to her, but she could see the damp undershirt clinging to his frame, could see the muscles of his shoulders move as he adjusted the wood in the fire. "How much further to Santa Fe?" Lydia asked, trying to distract herself from thoughts that had no business entering her mind. "At our current pace, with good weather, maybe 5 more days. We will reach Socorro tomorrow if we start early. You can rest there in a proper hotel if you like. continue on with the stage. And you? I will keep heading north. I have a job waiting in Colorado. Need to be there by mid-May. 5 more days, Lydia thought. 5 more days of traveling with this man. And then they would part ways forever. The thought created a strange hollowness in her chest that she did not want to examine too closely. The sky deepened from blue to indigo to black, and the stars began to emerge exactly as Marcus had predicted. They were stunning, more numerous than Lydia had ever imagined possible, spreading across the heavens in a river of light. "The Milky Way," Marcus said, his voice hushed with reverence. "That band of brightness across the middle. The ancient Greeks thought it was milk from the goddess Hera. The Comanche believe it is the spirit path that leads to the afterlife. What do you believe?" "I believe it is beautiful," he said simply. "And that is enough." Lydia's dress was finally dry enough to wear, though still slightly damp in the thickest seams. She gathered it up along with her undergarments. "I am going to step behind those trees and dress," she announced. "Take your time. I will prepare the bedrolls." She moved into the shadows, away from the firelight, and wrestled her way back into her clothing. The fabric was stiff from drying so quickly, and it smelled of wood smoke, but it felt like armor, like civilization, like safety. She buttoned the dress up to her throat and smoothed down the skirt, trying to work out the worst of the wrinkles with her hands. When she returned to the fire, Marcus had laid out 2 bedrolls on opposite sides of the flames, a respectful distance apart. He had put his shirt and vest back on, though they were still damp, and was checking the horse's tethers one final time. "Thank you," Lydia said, holding out his coat. "This probably saved my life." He turned to take it from her, and for the first time since the river crossing, they faced each other directly in the firelight. Lydia caught her breath. She had not gotten a proper look at him before, had been too cold, too focused on survival. Now she saw a face that was strong-featured and honest, with a firm jaw shadowed by a day's growth of beard, a straight nose, and eyes that were a surprising light brown, almost amber in the firelight. He was handsome, she realized with a start, but it was more than that. There was kindness in his face, a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rough profession. "You are welcome," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. He was looking at her too, really looking, and Lydia wondered what he saw. A bedraggled schoolteacher with tangled hair and a wrinkled dress? Or something else? The moment stretched between them, fragile and charged, until Marcus cleared his throat and looked away. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be another long day of riding." Lydia nodded and moved to her bedroll, suddenly exhausted. Every muscle in her body ached from the river crossing, from the tension of the day. She lay down, pulling the blanket up to her chin, and watched as Marcus added more wood to the fire. "Will it be safe?" she asked. "Sleeping out in the open like this? Safe enough. We are on well-traveled ground, and the fire will keep away most animals. I will keep watch for a few hours, then sleep. If anything concerning happens, I will wake you." But despite her exhaustion, sleep did not come easily. Lydia lay staring up at that impossible canopy of stars, listening to the crackle of the fire, the occasional snort from one of the horses, the quiet sounds of Marcus moving around the camp. She thought about the series of choices that had led her here, to this moment, lying under the stars in New Mexico territory, with a man she had met only this morning. If someone had told her a month ago, back in Boston, that this would be her life, she would have laughed in disbelief. But here she was, and the strange thing was that despite the danger, despite the impropriety, despite everything, she felt more alive than she had in years. "Marcus?" she said quietly, not sure if he was still awake. "Yes? Why did you agree to guide us? The stage manager said you were not planning to take passengers." Silence for a long moment. Then, "I saw you waiting there, standing apart from the others. You had this look on your face, this determination. It reminded me of how I felt when I first came west, desperate to start over, willing to risk everything for a chance at something better. I guess I wanted to help someone else get their new beginning." Lydia felt tears prick at her eyes. "That is exactly what this is, a new beginning. I hope it is everything you want it to be." "Me too," she whispered. She must have fallen asleep eventually because she woke to birdsong and pale dawn light filtering through the cottonwood leaves. The fire had burned down to embers, and Marcus was already up, leading the horses down to the river to drink. Lydia sat up, pushing hair out of her face, feeling stiff and sore, but surprisingly rested. She stood and tried to make herself presentable, finger-combing her hair and re-pinning it into a simple bun at the nape of her neck. Her dress was hopelessly wrinkled, but there was nothing to be done about that. She folded the bedroll as best she could and was waiting by the fire when Marcus returned with the horses. "Good morning," he said, and she thought she detected a smile in his voice. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected. How long were you on watch?" "Long enough. I am used to short sleep." He began to saddle the horses with practiced efficiency. "We should eat quickly and get moving. I want to make Socorro by evening." They finished the remaining fish from the night before, cold but still filling, and within half an hour they were mounted and moving north. The landscape changed as they rode, becoming more arid, punctuated by mesas and arroyos. The sun climbed higher, beating down with increasing intensity, and Lydia was grateful for the bonnet that shaded her face. They rode mostly in silence, but it was a comfortable silence. Every so often Marcus would point out something of interest: a hawk circling overhead, tracks in the dust that indicated a small herd of pronghorn had passed recently, a distant pueblo built into the side of a cliff face. "How did you learn all of this?" Lydia asked during one of their brief rest stops. "About the land, the animals, all of it?" "Trial and error, mostly," Marcus admitted. "I made plenty of mistakes my first few years out here. Got lost more times than I can count, ate some plants I should not have, trusted some people I should not have trusted. But I learned. You learn fast out here, or you do not survive. Do you ever regret leaving Virginia?" He considered the question, staring out at the horizon. "No, there was nothing left for me there. My parents died within a year of each other. The farm was gone. My sister married and moved to North Carolina. Coming west gave me a purpose, a way to make a living on my own terms. Out here, a man is judged by what he can do, not by who his family was or what he lost in the war. That must be freeing." "It is." He turned to look at her. "Is that why you were leaving Boston? To be judged on your own merits?" "Partially," Lydia admitted, "but also because Boston became unbearable. Too many memories, too much grief. Every street corner reminded me of my parents, of the life we used to have. I needed to go somewhere they had never been, somewhere I could breathe without feeling like I was drowning in the past." Marcus nodded slowly. "I understand that more than you might think." They remounted and continued riding, and Lydia found herself watching him, studying the easy way he sat in the saddle, the casual confidence with which he navigated this harsh landscape. She thought about what he had said, about being judged on his own merits, and realized that was what drew her to him. He had not asked about her family connections or her social standing. He had not made assumptions about what she could or could not do. He had simply treated her as a capable person, worthy of respect. It was refreshing in a way she had not expected. Socorro appeared in the late afternoon, a small town built around a plaza, with adobe buildings baking in the sun and a church with a bell tower rising above the other structures. It looked dusty and tired, but to Lydia it represented civilization, safety, a return to the world of proper society. Marcus led them to a modest hotel near the plaza. "You should take a room here," he said as he dismounted. "Get a proper meal, sleep in a real bed. I will stable the horses and find my own accommodations." "Where will you stay?" "There is a boarding house on the edge of town that caters to drovers and cowboys. It is not fancy, but it is clean enough." Lydia felt a strange reluctance to part from him, even temporarily. "Will I see you tomorrow?" "If you still want to continue on together, I will be here at first light. But, Miss Parker, you should know that you can catch a stage from here to Santa Fe. It would be more comfortable, more proper than continuing with me." "Do you want me to take the stage?" Lydia asked, her heart beating faster. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his amber eyes. "I want you to do whatever makes you feel safest and most comfortable." "That is not what I asked." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his whole face. "No, I do not particularly want you to take the stage. I have enjoyed your company, Miss Parker, but I also recognize that traveling alone with me is not ideal for your reputation." "My reputation survived a night sleeping under the stars with you," Lydia pointed out. "I think it can survive a few more days on the trail." "Then I will see you at first light," Marcus said, tipping his hat to her before leading the horses away. Lydia watched him go, then turned and entered the hotel. The proprietress, a plump Mexican woman with kind eyes, showed her to a small room on the second floor. It contained a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single chair, but it felt like luxury after the previous night on the hard ground. Lydia paid for a bath to be brought up, and she spent a glorious hour soaking in the warm water, washing the dust and smoke from her hair and skin. She scrubbed her dress as best she could and hung it to dry by the window, then wrapped herself in the thin robe the proprietress had provided and sat on the bed, braiding her damp hair. A knock at the door startled her. She wrapped the robe tighter and cracked the door open to find the proprietress holding a tray. "Senor Cole, he paid for your dinner," the woman said with a knowing smile. "He said you should eat well and rest." Lydia took the tray, her cheeks burning. The meal was simple but abundant: roasted chicken, beans, tortillas, and fresh fruit. She ate every bite, suddenly ravenous, and wondered where Marcus was, what he was doing, if he was thinking about her the way she was thinking about him. This was dangerous, she knew. She had known this man for barely a day. She knew almost nothing about him beyond what he had told her, had no guarantee that any of it was true. And yet, something in her gut told her that Marcus Cole was exactly who he appeared to be: an honest man trying to make his way in a hard land, someone who kept his word and treated others with respect. She lay in the narrow bed as darkness fell, listening to the sounds of the town outside her window, voices speaking in Spanish and English, the clop of horse hooves on hard-packed dirt. Distant laughter from a saloon somewhere. It should have felt comforting, this return to civilization. But instead, she found herself missing the quiet of the open land, the crackling of the campfire, the sound of Marcus's voice as he told her about the stars. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, she dreamed of amber eyes and strong hands and a coat that smelled like safety. True to his word, Marcus was waiting in front of the hotel when Lydia emerged at dawn. He had 2 horses saddled and ready, along with fresh supplies. He looked like he had slept well, his face clean-shaven, his clothes brushed free of dust. "Good morning," he said, his face lighting up when he saw her. "I hope you rested well." "I did, thank you. And thank you for the dinner. You did not have to do that." "I wanted to." He helped her mount, his hand steady on her elbow. "We have a long ride ahead. The next settlement is not until late tomorrow, so we will be camping out again tonight. If you have changed your mind—" "I have not," Lydia interrupted. "Let us go." They rode out of Socorro as the sun climbed over the mountains, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber. The terrain grew more rugged as they traveled north, with red rock formations jutting up from the desert floor like ancient monuments. Marcus pointed out landmarks, telling her stories about the people who had lived here long before the Spanish arrived, before the Americans, back when the Pueblo peoples had built their cities into the cliffsides. "Do you ever worry about them?" Lydia asked. "The native tribes? I have heard stories about attacks on travelers." "Most of those stories are exaggerated," Marcus said carefully. "The real danger out here is not Indians, it is nature. Lack of water, flash floods, extreme heat or cold. As for the tribes, they have been pushed off their lands, their people killed or forced onto reservations. The violence that exists is born of desperation and injustice. I am not saying travelers are never attacked, but I think if our situations were reversed, if someone had taken everything from us, we might be desperate too." Lydia was quiet, considering this. "That is not what I expected you to say." "What did you expect?" "I do not know. Most people speak of Indians as savages, as obstacles to civilization. Most people have not spent time actually talking to them, learning their languages, hearing their stories," Marcus said. "I have traded with the Navajo, shared meals with Apache scouts, learned tracking from a Jicarilla guide. They are people, same as us, trying to protect what is theirs." "You are full of surprises, Marcus Cole." He glanced at her, something soft in his expression. "So are you, Lydia Parker." They rode through the morning and into the afternoon, stopping briefly to rest the horses and eat the tortillas and cheese Marcus had purchased in Socorro. The conversation flowed easily between them now, no longer the careful politeness of strangers. They talked about books they had read, places they wanted to see, dreams they harbored. Marcus admitted that he was saving money to buy his own ranch someday, a place where he could raise cattle and horses and maybe a family. Lydia told him about her plans to start a lending library in Santa Fe, something the town desperately needed. You think big, Marcus observed with approval. I like that. My mother used to say that if you are going to dream, you might as well dream boldly. Your mother was a wise woman. As the sun began to descend, Marcus guided them to another sheltered spot, this time a small canyon with a spring that fed a pool of clear water. We will camp here tonight, he announced. The water is good for drinking, and the canyon walls will shield us from the wind. They fell into an easy routine, working together to unsaddle the horses, gather firewood, and prepare a fire. Lydia realized with some surprise that she was enjoying this. The simple physicality of camping, the satisfaction of contributing to their survival. Back in Boston, she had always been so focused on maintaining appearances, on behaving the way a proper young lady should. Out here, none of that mattered. She could be useful, capable, strong. Marcus cooked a meal of beans and salt pork, while Lydia organized their supplies and refilled their canteens from the spring. They ate as the stars emerged, that same spectacular display that had awed Lydia the night before. Tell me more about your ranch dream, Lydia said, setting aside her empty plate. Where would it be? Colorado, maybe, or Wyoming, somewhere with good grass and clean water, room for cattle to roam. I have been thinking about it for years, working toward it. Another year or two of steady work, and I will have enough saved to make a down payment on some land. Would you work it alone? Marcus poked at the fire. I would hope not. A ranch is too much work for one person. I would need to hire hands and... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. And I would hope to have a partner, a wife, someone to build that dream with. Lydia's heart beat faster. Do you have someone in mind? I did not, Marcus said softly. Until recently. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Lydia knew she should be cautious, should protect her heart. But something about this moment, about the firelight and the stars and the absolute honesty in his voice made her brave. Tell me about her, she said quietly. Marcus turned to look at her fully, his amber eyes intense. She is strong and intelligent. She crossed a swollen river even though she was terrified, because she had the courage to pursue her dreams. She is kind but not weak, educated but not snobbish. She has a laugh that sounds like music and a way of seeing the world that makes me want to be a better man. Lydia could barely breathe. Marcus, I know this is fast, he continued, his voice urgent now. I know we have only known each other for 2 days, but Lydia, I have met a lot of people in my travels, and I have never met anyone like you. You make me want to stop drifting, to put down roots, to build something permanent. I feel it too, Lydia whispered. This connection between us. I have been trying to tell myself it is just gratitude, or loneliness, or the strangeness of the circumstances. But it is more than that, is it not? Much more, Marcus agreed. He reached across the space between them, and Lydia met him halfway, their fingers intertwining. His hand was warm and calloused, strong and gentle at the same time. They sat like that for a long moment, holding hands across the fire, neither speaking, both understanding that something fundamental had shifted between them. When Marcus finally spoke again, his voice was tentative. I know you have plans in Santa Fe, a teaching position waiting for you. I would never ask you to give that up. But Lydia, would you consider, after you are settled, after you have had time to think about it, would you consider the possibility of a future with me? Yes, Lydia said without hesitation. I would consider it. I would do more than consider it. Marcus's face broke into a smile so wide and genuine that Lydia felt her own heart soar in response. He stood and moved around the fire to sit beside her, still holding her hand, and they leaned against each other, watching the flames dance. Tell me everything, Lydia said. All your plans for this ranch. I want to hear every detail. So Marcus talked, painting pictures with his words of a house built from timber and stone, of pastures filled with cattle, of horses running free against mountain backdrops. He described a life of hard work, but also of freedom, of building something with his own hands, of proving that a man could make his own way in the world regardless of where he came from. And Lydia found herself adding to the vision, describing a library in the main room, shelves built into the walls, a school nearby where she could teach the children of ranch hands and neighbors. She talked about gardens and chickens, and maybe a dog to keep watch over it all. It sounds perfect, Marcus said, wonder in his voice. It does, Lydia agreed. Then, more seriously, But Marcus, we have to be realistic. We barely know each other. What if we reach Santa Fe and discover that this feeling was just an illusion, a product of the journey? Then we will know, Marcus said simply. But I do not think it is an illusion. Do you? Lydia looked into his eyes, seeing nothing but sincerity and hope. No, I do not think it is either. He lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so tender that it brought tears to Lydia's eyes. Then we will take this one day at a time. No pressure, no assumptions. We will get you safely to Santa Fe, and then we will see what happens next. They stayed up late talking, reluctant to let the night end, but eventually exhaustion claimed them both. Marcus insisted that Lydia take his bedroll since it was slightly thicker, and he made do with a saddle blanket. They lay on opposite sides of the fire again, maintaining propriety, but before Lydia fell asleep, she heard Marcus's voice drift across the flames. "Good night, Lydia. Sleep well." "Good night, Marcus," she whispered back, and fell asleep smiling. The next days passed in a blur of riding and talking and growing closer. They crossed high desert and pine forests, followed ancient trails and forded shallow streams. Marcus taught Lydia how to spot water from a distance, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to identify edible plants. Lydia shared her knowledge too, reciting poetry from memory, explaining the grammar and syntax of languages she had studied, discussing philosophy and history. They talked about everything and nothing, comfortable in each other's presence in a way that felt both new and ancient. Sometimes they would ride in silence for hours, but it was never awkward. The silence felt full, rich with unspoken understanding. On the fourth night, they camped in a meadow carpeted with wildflowers, and Marcus picked a handful of the purple blooms and presented them to Lydia with a formal bow. "For the lady?" he said, his eyes twinkling. Lydia accepted them with a laugh, pressing them to her nose to smell the delicate fragrance. "They are beautiful. What are they called?" "I have no idea," Marcus admitted. "But they are pretty, and they made me think of you, so I picked them." "You are going to spoil me with such gestures." "That is the plan." Later, after they had eaten and the fire had burned down to embers, Marcus sat beside Lydia on her bedroll, their shoulders touching. "Tell me what you are afraid of," he said quietly. The question surprised her. "What do you mean?" "Everyone is afraid of something. Tell me yours." Lydia thought about it, about all the fears she carried. "I am afraid of failing," she admitted. "Of getting to Santa Fe and discovering that I am not a good enough teacher, that I cannot manage a classroom, that my uncle's faith in me was misplaced. I am afraid of being alone, of never building the kind of life I want. And I am afraid—" She paused, gathering courage. "I am afraid of losing you, of having found something precious and watching it slip away." Marcus took her hand. "I am afraid of that too. But Lydia, fear is just a sign that we care about something enough to be scared of losing it. We will take those fears and face them together. You are going to be an excellent teacher because you are patient and intelligent and passionate about education. And you will not be alone, not if I have anything to say about it." "What are you afraid of?" Lydia asked. "Not being good enough," Marcus said immediately. "I have spent years working toward this dream of owning a ranch. But what if I fail? What if I am not capable of running my own operation? And I am afraid of letting you down, of not being the man you need me to be." "You are already more than enough," Lydia said fiercely. "Marcus, you are one of the best men I have ever known. You are kind and competent and honest. Any woman would be lucky to have you." "I only want one woman," Marcus said, his voice low, "and she is sitting right here." He turned to face her fully, and Lydia felt her breath catch. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing gently across her cheekbone. "May I kiss you?" he asked, the question barely a whisper. "Please," Lydia breathed. Marcus leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and then his lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Lydia's eyes closed, her hand coming up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart thunder beneath her palm. The kiss deepened, became more sure, and Lydia felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "I am in love with you, Lydia Parker. I know it is fast, I know it is crazy, but it is the truth. "I love you too," Lydia whispered, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. "I think I have been falling for you since you turned your back by the fire and gave me your coat." Marcus laughed, the sound full of joy. "That might have been the moment I started falling too. You were so brave, so stubborn, so determined. I thought to myself, this is a woman worth knowing." They kissed again and again, and it was late before they finally forced themselves to separate and lie in their respective bedrolls. But even from across the fire, Lydia could feel Marcus's presence like warmth, like safety, like home. Santa Fe appeared on the afternoon of the 5th day, sprawling at the base of the mountains like a jewel in the desert. The city was larger than Lydia had expected, with proper streets and substantial buildings, a far cry from the rough frontier towns they had passed through. Marcus guided them to a respectable hotel near the plaza, and Lydia felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Relief that they had arrived safely, that her journey was complete. Disappointment because this meant her time alone with Marcus was ending. "I will help you get settled," Marcus said as he dismounted. "Make sure you find your uncle and that everything is arranged." "And then?" Lydia asked, her heart in her throat. "Then I need to continue on to Colorado. I have a job starting in 3 days, and I'm already cutting it close." He saw her face fall and quickly added, "But I will be back. As soon as the job is finished, in about 6 weeks, I will come back to Santa Fe, if you still want me to." "Of course I want you to," Lydia said. They found her uncle's address easily enough, a modest house on the eastern edge of town. Lydia's uncle, Luther Parker, was a tall, thin man in his 50s with kind eyes and her father's nose. He welcomed Lydia with genuine warmth and invited Marcus in for coffee. Over cups of strong, bitter coffee, Luther explained the teaching position. The school was small, only about 15 students of various ages, but it was growing. The pay was modest but steady, and it came with a small apartment above the schoolhouse. Lydia would start in 1 week, giving her time to settle in and prepare. "You look just like your mother," Luther said to Lydia with a sad smile. "She would be so proud of you, making this journey, starting fresh out here." "I hope so," Lydia said softly. Marcus stood to leave, saying he needed to get on the road if he was going to reach his job on time. Lydia walked him out, her uncle tactfully remaining inside. On the front porch, Marcus took both of Lydia's hands in his. 6 weeks, he said firmly. "I will be back in 6 weeks. And Lydia, I want you to use that time to be sure. Be sure about your feelings. Be sure about this life. Be sure about me. If you have any doubts, any reservations, you tell me when I return. I want you to choose this, choose us, with absolute certainty." "I am already certain," Lydia protested. "Then humor me, and be certain for 6 more weeks." He smiled, but his eyes were serious. "I need to know that you are choosing me because you want to, not because you feel obligated or because the journey created some kind of false intimacy." "It was not false," Lydia said. "I know, but let us be sure." He leaned down and kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then briefly, sweetly, her lips. 6 weeks, Lydia Parker, and then we will talk about ranches and libraries and building a life together. "I will be waiting," she promised. She watched him ride away, her heart aching but also full of hope. 6 weeks was not so long. She could wait 6 weeks. The time passed both slowly and quickly. Lydia threw herself into preparing for her teaching position, meeting with the outgoing teacher, organizing the small schoolroom, planning lessons. Her apartment was tiny but charming, with a window that looked out over the mountains. She furnished it with basic necessities and a few personal touches, already imagining how it might look with Marcus's presence in it. She wrote him a letter, care of the ranch in Colorado, where he had said he would be working, pouring out all her thoughts and feelings onto paper. She told him about her students, about Santa Fe, about how much she missed him. She sealed it with a kiss pressed to the paper, feeling foolish and romantic and happier than she could remember being. The school opened, and Lydia discovered that she loved teaching even more than she had hoped. Her students ranged from 6 to 14, a mix of Anglo, Mexican, and Pueblo children, each with their own strengths and challenges. She taught reading and arithmetic, geography and history, and she started a small lending library in one corner of the classroom, just as she had dreamed. Her uncle was supportive and kind, inviting her for Sunday dinners and introducing her to respectable families in town. Several of these families had sons or brothers who expressed interest in courting the new school teacher, but Lydia gently declined all offers. Her heart was spoken for. 4 weeks into her wait, a letter arrived with Marcus's handwriting on the envelope. Lydia tore it open with shaking hands and read, "My dearest Lydia, your letter reached me, and I have read it so many times the paper is starting to wear thin. I miss you more than I thought possible to miss another person. The work here is hard and the days are long, but I think of you constantly. I think of your smile, your laugh, the way you looked at me across the campfire. I think of our plans, our dreams, our future. 2 more weeks, and I will be done here. 2 more weeks, and I will ride as fast as my horse can carry me back to Santa Fe, back to you. I hope you are well. I hope teaching is everything you wanted it to be, and I desperately hope, that you still want me the way I want you. Yours always, Marcus." Lydia pressed the letter to her heart and cried, not from sadness, but from overwhelming joy. She wrote back immediately, telling him yes, 1,000 times. Yes, she still wanted him, would always want him. The final 2 weeks crawled by with agonizing slowness. Lydia found herself watching the road, jumping at every sound of hoofbeats. Her students teased her gently about being distracted, and her uncle smiled knowingly but said nothing. And then, on a bright morning in late May, she looked out the schoolroom window during arithmetic lessons and saw him, Marcus, dusty from the road, riding into the plaza on his familiar bay horse. He dismounted in one fluid motion and looked around, clearly searching for something, searching for her. "Class dismissed," Lydia said abruptly, and her students looked at her in confusion. "Early dismissal today. Go home, quickly now." The children needed no further encouragement. They grabbed their slates and primers and stampeded out the door, leaving Lydia standing alone in the suddenly quiet classroom. She removed her apron with shaking hands, smoothed down her hair, and walked outside. Marcus spotted her immediately. His face lit up like sunrise, and he strode across the plaza, closing the distance between them in long, purposeful steps. Lydia ran to meet him, propriety forgotten, and he caught her in his arms, lifting her clean off her feet and spinning her around. "You are here!" she gasped, laughing and crying at the same time. "You are really here." "I am here," Marcus confirmed, setting her down but not releasing her. "And I am not leaving, not without you." "I love you," Lydia said, loud enough that several passers-by turned to look. "I have been sure every day for 6 weeks. I am choosing you, choosing us, choosing this life." Marcus cupped her face in both hands and kissed her, deep and passionate and full of promise, right there in the middle of the plaza where anyone could see. Lydia kissed him back with equal fervor, not caring who watched, not caring about anything except this moment, this man, this love. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marcus kept his hands on her face, his amber eyes searching hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast. I know we should probably wait longer, but I cannot stand the thought of being away from you for even another day. Marry me, Lydia. Let me be your husband and your partner, and the person who gets to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of our lives." "Yes," Lydia said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church near the plaza, with Lydia's uncle and a handful of her students and their families in attendance. Lydia wore a simple dress of pale blue, and Marcus wore his best suit, the one he had been saving for special occasions. They spoke their vows with steady voices and shining eyes, promising to love and honor each other through all the challenges that life might bring. After the ceremony, there was a small celebration at her uncle's house. Lydia's students presented them with a quilt they had made in secret, each square decorated with drawings and messages. Marcus accepted it with visible emotion, thanking them and promising that it would have a place of honor in their home. Their home. The words sounded like magic. They spent their wedding night in Lydia's small apartment, and it was both awkward and beautiful, tender and passionate, exactly as first times should be. Lydia had been nervous, but Marcus was patient and gentle, and by the time the sun rose, she felt like she had discovered a whole new language of intimacy and connection. "Good morning, Mrs. Cole," Marcus murmured against her hair as dawn light filtered through the window. "Good morning, husband," Lydia replied, loving the way the word felt in her mouth. They stayed in Santa Fe for another month while Marcus finalized the purchase of land in Colorado. It turned out that his savings, combined with a small inheritance Lydia had from her parents that she had not mentioned, was enough to buy a substantial parcel near Durango in the southwestern part of the state. The land came with a small existing house and outbuildings, and it had good water and grazing. Lydia fulfilled her commitment to the school through the end of the term, training her replacement and ensuring the lending library would continue. It was hard to leave her students, but the pull of building a life with Marcus was stronger. They traveled to Colorado in late July, taking their time, retracing parts of the route they had taken together months before, when they passed the spot where they had first camped, where Marcus had built a fire and turned away while her dress dried. They stopped and made love under the stars, christening the place where their story had truly begun. The ranch was everything Marcus had promised and more. The house was small but sturdy, and they spent the first weeks making it truly theirs. Lydia set up her library in the main room, shelves that Marcus built for her. He began the hard work of establishing his herd, buying cattle, and hiring 2 ranch hands to help with the work. That first winter was hard. The work was endless. The weather was brutal, and there were moments when Lydia wondered if they had made a terrible mistake. But Marcus never wavered, never complained, and his steady strength gave her strength too. They learned to work as a team, each supporting the other, each taking turns being the strong one when the other faltered. By the spring, the ranch was thriving. The cattle had survived the winter. New calves were being born, and Lydia had started teaching the children of their ranch hands and neighboring families in a corner of the barn they had converted into a schoolroom. It was not much, but it was a start. In May, almost exactly a year after they had married, Lydia discovered she was pregnant. She told Marcus over dinner, watching his face transform from confusion to understanding to pure joy. "A baby," he breathed, dropping to his knees beside her chair and pressing his ear to her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." "We are going to have a baby," Lydia confirmed, running her fingers through his hair. "Are you ready to be a father?" "I am terrified," Marcus admitted, "but I am also so happy I could burst." Their son was born in January of 1880 during a blizzard that trapped them in the house for 3 days. The local midwife arrived just in time, and Marcus held Lydia's hand through every moment of labor, never once leaving her side. They named him Matthew, after Lydia's father, and he was perfect. Dark hair like Marcus, but Lydia's nose and chin. He had a strong cry and a stronger will, and from the moment he entered the world, he transformed their lives completely. Lydia had never known it was possible to love someone so completely and immediately. She would watch Marcus hold their son, seeing the wonder and tenderness in his face, and feel so full of love she thought she might overflow with it. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Grace, who was all blonde curls and mischief from the start. The ranch continued to grow and prosper, and Marcus built an addition onto the house to accommodate their expanding family. Lydia's schoolroom moved into its own building, a small but proper schoolhouse that served children from miles around. They had challenges, of course. A drought one year that threatened everything. Sickness that swept through the region. The normal difficulties of raising children and running a business. But they faced each challenge together, their love deepening with each passing year, each obstacle overcome. On their 5th anniversary, Marcus took Lydia back to the spot by the Rio Grande, where he had first built a fire for her, where their journey had truly begun. They camped there overnight, leaving the children with her uncle, who had come for an extended visit. "Do you remember?" Marcus asked as they sat by the fire he had built, watching the flames dance. "Every moment," Lydia said. "I remember being so cold and scared. I remember you turning your back to give me privacy, offering me your coat. I remember thinking that you might be the kindest man I had ever met. I remember thinking you were the bravest woman I had ever seen," Marcus replied, standing there shivering but determined. "I knew in that moment that you were special, even if I did not yet understand how special." "We have built a good life," Lydia said softly. "We have built a wonderful life," Marcus corrected. "You, me, the children, the ranch, the school, all of it. And it all started here, with a river crossing and a fire. And a cowboy who turned away," Lydia added with a smile. "And a school teacher who was brave enough to trust him," Marcus finished. They made love that night by the fire, under the same canopy of stars that had witnessed the beginning of their love story. And when they returned home the next day to their children, their ranch, their life, Lydia felt a deep, abiding contentment. This was what happiness looked like. Not a single perfect moment, but a life built moment by moment, choice by choice, with the person you loved by your side. Years passed, measured in the growth of their children, the expansion of their ranch, the deepening of their roots in the community. Matthew grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books as much as horses. Grace was wild and fearless, always climbing trees or racing across the fields. They had a third child, a boy named Thomas, who arrived unexpectedly when Lydia was 35 and convinced her childbearing years were behind her. The school flourished beyond Lydia's wildest dreams. The small schoolhouse became a larger one, and eventually they hired a second teacher to help manage the growing number of students. Lydia became known throughout the region as an excellent educator, and families moved to the area specifically so their children could attend her school. Marcus's ranch became one of the most respected operations in southwestern Colorado. He was known as a fair employer and an honest businessman, someone whose word was his bond. He never lost the gentle strength that had first attracted Lydia, never became hardened by the difficulties of ranch life. He remained the man who had turned away by the fire, the man who understood that true strength included tenderness. On their 20th anniversary, they held a large party at the ranch, inviting everyone who had been part of their journey. Neighbors and friends came from all over the territory, and their children, now nearly grown, helped prepare food and organize games. Lydia's uncle, now elderly but still sharp, gave a toast celebrating their love and perseverance. 20 years ago, Luther said, raising his glass, my niece arrived in Santa Fe, having just crossed the territories with a stranger. I admit I was worried, but that stranger turned out to be the best man she could have chosen, and together they have built not just a family or a business, but a community. To Marcus and Lydia Cole, may you have 20 more years of happiness. Everyone cheered and drank, and Lydia felt tears slip down her cheeks. She looked around at this gathering, at all these people whose lives had intersected with theirs, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That night, after all the guests had gone home and the children were finally asleep, Marcus and Lydia walked out to the porch and sat in the rocking chairs they kept there. The stars were spectacular as always, that same endless canopy that had watched over them through everything. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked, taking her hand. "I am thinking about how different my life might have been if that stagecoach had not broken its axle," Lydia said. "If I had reached Santa Fe on schedule, if we had never met. It seems like such a small thing, an axle breaking, but it changed everything." "I think we would have found each other somehow," Marcus said. "Maybe not that day, maybe not in that way, but eventually. Some connections are inevitable." "Do you really believe that?" "I do. I believe you were meant to be mine, and I was meant to be yours, and the universe conspired to make sure we found each other." He smiled at her, the same amber eyes that had captured her heart 20 years ago. "Though I am grateful it happened when it did. I cannot imagine spending even one more year without you." "I love you," Lydia said, the words as true and necessary as breathing. "I have loved you for 20 years, and I will love you for 20 more, and then 20 after that, however long we are given." "And I love you," Marcus replied, "more with each passing day." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, watching the stars. Behind them, their house held their sleeping children, the evidence of their love made manifest. Around them, their land stretched out in all directions, the ranch they had built together through hard work and determination. And between them flowed that connection that had started by a fire beside a river, when a cowboy had turned away and a school teacher had been brave enough to trust him. As Lydia sat there, she thought about all the moments that had led to this one. The decision to leave Boston, the broken axle, the swollen river, the fire, Marcus's coat. Every choice, every challenge, every leap of faith had been a thread in the tapestry of their life together. And it was beautiful. The years continued to pass, as they always do. Matthew went east to study law, something that both surprised and delighted his parents. Grace married a neighboring rancher's son and started her own family just 5 miles away. Thomas, their surprise baby, fell in love with the ranch and began learning everything he could from his father, clearly intending to take over the operation someday. Marcus's hair went gray at the temples, then more broadly, and Lydia found she loved the distinguished look of it. Her own hair, still long, though now streaked with silver, became something Marcus loved to brush out for her in the evenings, a ritual of intimacy they maintained even as their bodies aged and changed. They faced losses too. Lydia's uncle passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78. One of their ranch hands, a man who had been with them almost from the beginning, died in an accident with a spooked horse. They weathered each grief together, leaning on each other, finding strength in their partnership. On their 30th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Matthew brought his wife and 2 daughters from Denver. Grace arrived with her husband and their 4 children. Thomas, still unmarried but courting a schoolteacher from Durango, came from the barn where he had been working. They had a feast laid out on long tables under the cottonwood trees, and after everyone had eaten their fill, Matthew stood to make a speech. "I have spent most of my life watching my parents," he said, looking at Marcus and Lydia with love in his eyes. "Watching the way they work together, support each other, love each other. They have given us an example of what a true partnership looks like, and it is something I try to emulate in my own marriage. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for showing us what love really means." More toasts followed, more speeches, more laughter and tears. And through it all, Lydia held Marcus's hand, feeling the same flutter in her chest she had felt that first night by the fire, 30 years and a lifetime ago. When they finally went to bed that night, exhausted but happy, Marcus pulled Lydia close and kissed her temple. 30 years, he marveled. It feels like both forever and the blink of an eye. "I would do it all again," Lydia said. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would choose you again and again and again." "Even the river crossing?" Marcus teased. "Especially the river crossing," Lydia replied, "because it brought me to you." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, the way they had for 30 years, the way they would for however many years remained to them. And outside their window, the stars continued their eternal dance, watching over the ranch, the family, the love story that had started with a dress soaked from the river, a cowboy who built a fire, and a decision to turn away while she dried, giving her the gift of privacy, respect, and the first glimpse of the man who would become her whole world. Their story, which had begun with water and fire, had been forged into something unbreakable, something that would outlast them both in the memories of their children and grandchildren, in the school that still bore Lydia's influence, in the ranch that still operated on principles Marcus had established. It was a legacy built not of grand gestures, but of small daily choices to love, to trust, to support, to build together. And as the years stretched toward their 4th decade together, then their 5th, Marcus and Lydia Cole remained what they had always been, 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen each other despite uncertainty, and who had built a life more beautiful than either had ever dreamed possible. They grew old together with grace and gratitude, their love not diminished by time, but deepened, enriched, made more precious by every year they were granted. When Lydia was 68 and Marcus 70, they took one final trip to that spot by the Rio Grande, their children worried but supportive of their desire to return to where it had all begun. They could not camp overnight anymore, their bones too old for sleeping on the ground, but they stood by the river in the afternoon sun, holding hands, remembering. "I can still see you," Marcus said softly, "standing there dripping wet, shivering, but with your chin up, refusing to quit. You were magnificent." "I was terrified," Lydia corrected, "but you made me feel safe. From that very first day, you made me feel like I could do anything because you believed in me." "We believed in each other," Marcus said. "That was always our strength." They stayed until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, then made their way to the hotel in the nearest town, where their children had insisted on booking them a room. And that night, lying in a proper bed, hearing the river's distant roar through the window, they held each other and knew that their story was complete, not ending, never truly ending as long as their love lived on in their children and grandchildren, but complete in the sense that they had lived fully, loved deeply, and built something that mattered. Marcus Cole and Lydia Parker. Cole lived another decade after that final trip to the river, years filled with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with quiet mornings on the porch and afternoon walks around the ranch. Marcus passed first, peacefully in his sleep at 80, with Lydia holding his hand. She followed him 2 years later, surrounded by family, her last words a whispered, "I am coming, my love." They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, and on their shared headstone, their children had inscribed, "Together they crossed rivers and built dreams, forever united in love." And the ranch continued, passed down through generations, the school still operating, the library still filled with books. The story of how Marcus and Lydia met became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren, a reminder that the greatest love stories often begin with the smallest acts of kindness, with a fire built and a moment of respect, with two strangers who became everything to each other. The Rio Grande still flows, swelling with spring melt and subsiding in summer heat, crossing the border of territories that became states. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light is just right, if you visit that spot where cottonwoods grow thick, you might feel the echo of an old love story, of a cowboy who turned away and a woman who learned to trust, of a life built on the foundation of respect and growing into something transcendent. Their story was simple in its way, a meeting, a journey, a choice to love. But in that simplicity was everything that matters, everything that lasts, everything that makes a life worth living. And so their love endured, not despite the challenges, but because of them, not separate from their life, but woven through every moment of it, a golden thread that connected beginning to middle to end, that turned strangers into lovers, into partners, into legends. This was their story, complete and perfect and entirely their own. And it all began with a river crossing, a soaked dress, and a cowboy who understood that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is turn away, giving someone the space and dignity they need, trusting that when you turn back around, something beautiful will be waiting.